when you have a history of greatness, the real challenge starts after the finish line.
I can taste triumph with the heart of a lion.
When victory alone isn't enough, you chase something greater, no matter how difficult the path, on the dirt, in the sand, and beyond. The new 2024 Ridgeline, Passport, and Pilot, part of our most rugged trail sport lineup yet. From Honda.
Welcome to Bayou Time. I'm Jacob DeGate. It's my pleasure to have joining us on stage State Representative Beryl Amedee. Thank you very much for joining us.
It's always a pleasure to be here. Thanks.
Okay, I know last time we talked, you were going through the special session. Can you tell us, some of the highlights of things that were accomplished by the legislature during the special session?
Sure. I have a short list of some of the most major changes that people were excited about. One is that we lowered the individual income tax rate to 3%, which happens to be the second lowest in the nation, so yay. Another is we almost tripled the standard deduction. Now, this is just for state, okay? I know federal is a different thing, but for the state, the standard deduction is going to be $12,500. So the first $12,500 that a person makes is not going to be taxed by the state. We doubled the retirement income tax exemption, so seniors can make up to $12,000 on top of that. And we also reduced business taxes, so we lowered the tax rate on businesses. We also eliminated the corporate franchise tax because that was kind of hindering business and making us not competitive with other states. We also eliminated about 60 special interest income tax breaks. And we eliminated sales tax on prescription glasses and medical devices, and we removed a vehicle registration penalty for people who are moving into Louisiana. And we simplified the tax code by getting rid of over 100 exemptions. And we don't expect that too many people will be very sad about that. Most of these were exemptions people weren't taking. So it just cleans up our tax structure.
Okay, and so that's all going to take place when you do your taxes next year, right, for this year?
Yes, those things went into effect. So starting with the income you started making on January 1st of this year, it's only going to be taxed at 3%. So I can't really help you out with your 2024 taxes right now. That's under the old amount, but next year's looking good.
Oh, certainly. Okay, and up next, I know we have an election coming up, I believe is it the 29th? We have an election has some constitutional amendments on the ballot. I know that you've been involved in going through those. Can you tell us, what's on store first?
Okay, well, there are 4 amendments that are going to be on the ballot. Some are longer than others. So let's just start from the top with number 1 and keep them in order.
Sounds good.
Okay, so amendment number 1 is going to be about the Louisiana Supreme Court's jurisdiction to discipline lawyers who practice here from out of state and granting the legislature the authority to establish trial courts with limited and specialized jurisdiction. So the first part of that amendment about the discipline of out-of-state lawyers, the Supreme Court has jurisdiction over disciplinary proceedings against any member of the bar. And the Supreme Court also gets to write the rules of professional conduct. And those same rules apply to attorneys who practice here who are not from Louisiana. And so with this amendment passing, the Supreme Court would also be able to discipline the out-of-state attorneys if they break those rules of conduct.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't think anybody would have any problem with that one. That seems pretty likely, although they have the second half of it that it's kind of unrelated, and I'm not sure why it's not a second one on its own, but they included them both together, so you got to make sure to look at both of them to see whether or not.
Yes, it's a 2-part amendment, and so the second half is the part that grants the legislature additional power to establish trial courts and limited jurisdiction specialized courts. And I need to make a clarification here. These courts are not the same as what we already know of as specialty courts. A specialty court would be like a drug court where you could go in and you could go through programs and such to try and deal with your addiction instead of just going sit in jail.
Sure.
So those are specialty courts. This is specialized jurisdiction. So the definition would be these courts have authority that's restricted to specific types of cases as defined by law. And some examples that we already are familiar with are like city court, parish court, justice of the peace court, and courts that handle minor civil disputes, traffic violations and such, and like civil cases under $35,000 go to city court. And so the primary role of these courts would be adjudication. So that means that it's not rehabilitative like a drug court. It's actually determining guilt within their specialized area. And so their jurisdiction under the constitutional amendment, if it passes, would be, the legislature's jurisdiction would be to be able to create these special courts, and they would not necessarily have to be bound by parish boundaries. They could be regional, and they would have special jurisdiction based on subject matter, for example. So
yeah, I think business court is one that I think I've heard talked about a lot. Is
yes.
one option they would go to. I'm not sure exactly what type of cases that would handle, but that's something I've heard before. So.
Right, and that was the main reason that was given when the bill that provided this was making its way through the legislature. There are 27 states currently that have business courts, and the reason that a business court may be a good idea is because those courts are specially focused on handling business cases. So that would be like securities laws and antitrust issues. And so if you have a separate court called a business court, it could clean up the schedule and it could help more properly use the resources of the courts.
Okay. And that certainly is something to think about. And that's something that I guess if it does pass in the legislature, they would have debates on all that, on what type of things to create. That would be up to the legislature then at
Correct.
that point.
Correct.
So we'll have to see, this first step on where that goes. And then after that, what would take place during the session. But we do need to take a quick break, and then we can come back and go through. We got 3 more to go through. So stay tuned. We'll be back with more right here on HTV.
Today's social media segment is brought to you by Terrebonne General Health System. Your health is our legacy. Rouse's, you're either local or you're not. Buick, the craft of modern luxury. St. Martin and Bork, know your rights.
Welcome back to Bayou Time. I'm Jacob DeGate, and our guest today is State Representative Beryl Amedee. We're talking a little bit about amendments that are going on the ballot for March 29th, constitutional amendments. We went through the first one, and now why don't you describe the second one what we have on the ballot?
Okay. Constitutional Amendment number 2 is, in my opinion, the one that's getting the most attention from the public right now, and that's probably because it does so much. Constitutional Amendment 2 is a rewrite of the entire Article 7 of the state constitution, which is the part that deals with taxes and funds and exemptions. So this is the part of the Constitution that most directly affects how the legislature puts together the budget. And so that's why there's an effort to rewrite it. In Constitutional Amendment number 2, here's a few highlights. It reduces the maximum income tax rate. Now, currently, the rate of individual income tax is 3%, and that's already passed. That's already in effect for 2025. But this amendment would say that it cannot go any higher than 3.75% in the future.
Okay.
Another thing it does is it doubles the standard deduction for senior citizens. So that's above what we've already done. It limits government growth. So we put a certain formula into the constitutional amendment that would let the government only grow as much as the economy can sustain. And let's see, it protects against special interest tax breaks. It maintains the homestead exemption and certain other property tax exemptions. It provides some fiscal flexibility to increase infrastructure funding, roads and bridges. Yep. It allows for the elimination of the inventory tax. It pays off over $2 billion in teachers' pension debt. That's what frees up the money so that teachers can get the permanent pay raise. And it keeps more tax dollars in local communities. So,
and now, as far as the elimination of the inventory tax, would that take place if this passes, or is that something that the legislature would have to pass?
The constitutional amendment is what sets up the ability for parishes to decide.
Okay.
It makes it a local option, is the way I like to say it. So if this passes on March 29th, then each parish will be required to put together the parish governing body. In Terrebonne, that would be the council, the sheriff, and
yes, I believe they're forming a commission right now to go through that. So, okay, so that doesn't change anything that's already,
right. It gives the parishes options. They can keep it. They can do away with it quickly, or they can do away with it over time. And there are some benefits depending on which option they would choose.
Right.
So let's see. It lowers the maximum income tax rate, or it caps it actually. The government growth limit I mentioned, it's a formula that we designed so that the government growth, the ability of the budget to increase, will be tied to the state's economic capacity. The part that says modify operation of certain constitutional funds, that's mostly technical and procedural about various funds, but that is the part that includes the inventory tax. And, maybe the next part, provides for property tax exemptions. Well, that one's retaining the homestead exemption. And it retains an exemption for religious organizations. And this is part of why this amendment's getting so much attention. Besides the inventory tax, which we've been talking about since we got out of the special session, the wording in the current Constitution says property owned by a nonprofit corporation or association organized and operated exclusively for religious, dedicated places of burial, charitable, health, welfare, fraternal, or educational purposes. So that's pretty broad. The amendment that people are going to see on the 29th changes the wording, and it says this: property owned by a nonprofit operated exclusively for religious purposes as a house of worship, residential housing for clergy, priests, or nuns, or a seminary or other educational institution training individuals for religious ministry. So what would happen is the church building, the property that the church building itself sits on, or a ministry training school, or a monastery, or a nunnery, a convent, that property would be protected in the Constitution. The tax exemption for the other property that might be owned by the church or any other nonprofit will be moved to statute. And we increase the protection in the statute that's going to exist if this passes by saying that in that statute it can only be changed by a 2/3 vote of the legislature. So not a simple majority, but a 2/3 vote, which is actually the same level that it takes to pass any tax increase or create new exemptions. So that's the part that deals with property tax exemptions. And then the next part provides a permanent teacher salary increase by paying down, I think it was $2 billion towards a teacher retirement debt. It frees up that payment that the school districts have to make every year. And so if this passes, the school districts will be expected to take that savings and use that to provide for the teacher pay raise and support staff. And that's why it would be permanent. It wouldn't be a stipend like we've seen for the past few years.
Okay. It certainly does a lot. You know, it rewrites the article. I believe you said they had mentioned they had one lawsuit filed already that challenges the language. We don't know where that's going, though, right, at this point.
Right. And I know that there's been one filed. I heard there may be two at least so far. And I haven't read the lawsuit yet, but I believe that the main premise would be that because this particular amendment does so much, that it's considered dual object, meaning you're asking people to decide on multiple things when, what if they like 1, 2, and 3 and they don't like 4 and 5? But they only get to vote yes or no. So we will see where the lawsuits go, and the courts will have to make certain decisions. Right now, it's too late for the ballot language to change because the machines are already getting ready. So I think whatever the courts do, we'll just have to wait and see what passes or not.
Certainly. First step is the vote on March 29th, I guess.
Yes.
Okay. We do have to take another quick break, but we have 2 more amendments to go through, so stay tuned. We'll be right back. Right here.
Today's social media segment is brought to you by Alford and Associates for all of your insurance needs. CIS, Cardiovascular Institute of the South, the highest quality cardiovascular care available. Barker Honda, the Barker family tradition of quality.
Welcome back to Bayou Time. I'm Jacob DeGate, and we're discussing with State Representative Beryl Amedee. We're discussing the upcoming election on March 29th for the constitutional amendments that are on the ballot. We've discussed the first two so far, but two more remaining on the ballot, starting with Amendment 3, dealing with juveniles and or crimes to being tried as an adult. If you can go through and explain that one a little bit.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So right now in Louisiana, in certain cases, juveniles can be tried as adults. In other cases, anybody 17 and under can't be. So this amendment says, do you support an amendment to provide the legislature the authority to determine which felony crimes, when committed by a person under the age of 17, may be transferred for criminal prosecution as an adult? So right now, our Constitution lists 16 felony offenses that may result in a juvenile being transferred for prosecution as an adult. But this amendment would remove that whole list of offenses out of the Constitution, and instead it would give the legislature the authority to consider which ones should be only prosecuted as a minor and which offenses mean that someone could be prosecuted as an adult. And so we could take those one at a time. We could take them all 16 at one time. We could change them over time because, as you know, sometimes people come up with new felonies. And so we have to adjust the law.
Certainly.
Something's not illegal until it's written into the law.
Exactly. And
yes.
Certainly you have things nowadays with technology and new crimes being committed that you didn't have, certainly when the Constitution was created in the 70s. Certainly
Right.
have new felonies on the book now.
Right, unfortunately. So by moving the 16 felony offense list out of the Constitution and into statute, it lets Louisiana law be more flexible and keep up as we go. And that way we're not locked into something that gets outdated so quickly. And we also have number 4.
Okay, that's number 4. That's dealing with another one dealing with the judiciary, there we go. Dealing with vacancies. Can you explain that one a little bit?
Sure. So this is the shortest amendment and the easiest one to read. Do you support an amendment to provide for the use of the earliest election date to fill judicial vacancies? But people might look at that and say, well, why is it needed? How do we fill judicial vacancies? So this amendment is about special elections to fill a judicial vacancy. Do you remember not long ago we passed a law about closed party primaries?
Yes.
Okay.
Sure.
That's part of the reason that this came up as an issue. It included members of the state Supreme Court. Mm-hmm. So if we have an opening on the state Supreme Court and we have to fill that using the closed party primary system, there's some concern that we wouldn't be able to do all of that and still meet the 12-month deadline that's in the current Constitution. So what the amendment would do is it would make a new law that would allow it to, a newly created judgeship or a vacancy in the office of a judge would be filled by a special election called by the governor, and this is the new language, and be held on the election date first available pursuant to applicable law, after the date on which the vacancy occurs. And so another part of this that's new language is if the date of the next gubernatorial or congressional election is within 12 months of the date when the vacancy occurred, then the special election shall be held at the next gubernatorial or congressional election, if the special election can be held on that date in accordance with law. So it's really just making it practical to fit real life and the constraints of the calendar. So this would allow us to properly fill, in proper time, any vacancy on the Supreme Court. And it would be to me, more reasonable because it allows us to make use of the next already scheduled proper election date if possible.
I understand. That one seems pretty straightforward. So that's your 4 right there.
Yeah.
I know you do have a upcoming session coming in the future. We got about 2 minutes left. Are there any highlights or things that you're going to be promoting during that time?
Well, this is the season of the year where legislators are drafting bills. And so right now that's what we're doing. We're in bill draft mode. And because it's a fiscal-only session, it means that each legislator is only able to bring up to 5 bills that are not fiscal. So we could bring all the tax and spend bills we want, but if it's not a direct budget-related tax or spend type bill,
Certainly.
we have a limit of 5. So my current list is about 12, and so I'm working to whittle that down as to what can be ready this session or what should really pass this session and not wait another year or two. And I looked at the legislative website yesterday, and I believe that so far we've got less than 100 bills posted, but people should not rest easy because I do expect that by the time we get to session, we're going to have our usual number, which would be more like 1,200.
Oh, Lord.
Yeah, and all that plus the budget. So the governor has already presented his budget for the coming year to the Joint Budget Committee, and the budget he presented was based off of current law. So should the amendments that we just talked about pass, he may have to adjust the budget.
Certainly.
But if they don't pass, then we move forward with the budget as he proposed it. And so the Appropriations Committee starts budget hearings 3 weeks before session begins. So it's about to get really busy.
All right. And when does the session begin?
Let's see, April, what's the Monday, 14th or 15th?
Yeah, I know. In April. That's good enough
It's
answer
in
for me.
April, yes,
All right.
yes, on the Monday, right.
Thank you. Thank you very much for coming on, explaining a few of these amendments that are going to be on the ballot, and we appreciate hearing from you.
Yes, sir.
All right. Stay tuned for more right here on HTV.
Today's social media segment is brought to you by South Louisiana Bank. It's better when we bank together. Waits and Downer, attorneys at law. Terrebonne Ford, built Ford tough.